Hello, and welcome to this video. As I'm doing it, this is the second in a series, and this is on the work of William Miller and Stephen Rolnick entitled Motivational Interviewing. And I consider motivational interviewing to be one of the core foundational skills or set of skills that we use, certainly that I use. You may be aware of some of these techniques, you may use them. I think some of the techniques involved in motivational interviewing are used all the time by normal people every day. What makes motivational interviewing different? I think putting the skills together and encouraging you as a practitioner to use the skills and to work on and practice your levels of skill really offers key wins in the art of communication. I really believe that. I think the explainer video is really important. It summarizes the skills brilliantly. It gives you the core principles. It gives you some of the core skills, gives you some questions that you may be able to use. If you think that this set of skills will help you, I recommend reading the book.
Welcome to the explainer. Okay, so have you ever tried to convince someone to change a bad habit only to end up in a massive, frustrating argument? We're diving right into that today by decoding a really fascinating technique, motivational interviewing, or MI. We're going to explore exactly how you can unlock true behavioral change without nagging, arguing, or, just bossing people around. Seriously, think about it for a second. Why is giving perfectly logical, sound advice so wildly ineffective? I mean, we've all been there, right? You tell a friend they should really quit smoking or start eating healthier. You lay out all the totally sensible reasons, and boom, you hit an absolute brick wall of stubborn resistance. Well, it turns out when you push someone, human nature pretty much dictates that they're going to push back hard. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the ambivalence of change, then what motivational interviewing actually is. After that, we'll dive into the evidence for MI, unpack its core principles, and finally open up the practitioner's toolkit. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the ambivalence of change and the psychology of resistance. It's actually super fascinating to look at this through the lens of cognitive dissonance. Just as a quick refresher, that's the mental discomfort you feel when you hold two totally conflicting beliefs or behaviors at the exact same time. The classic example? A smoker. They know definitively that smoking is deadly, but they just keep lighting up anyway. They want the comfort of the habit, but they definitely don't want the health consequences. This creates this intense psychological friction, a deep ambivalence, that makes direct advice feel like a personal attack. Moving on to Section 2. What is motivational interviewing? Or, as I like to think of it, the Trojan horse of therapy. I was actually pretty surprised to learn this was originally developed way back in the 1980s by Stephen Rolnick and William R. Miller, and it started out primarily for substance abuse treatment. So, what is it? MI is a directive, client-centered counseling style. Its entire purpose is to elicit behavior change by helping individuals explore and resolve that exact ambivalence we just talked about. Rather than forcing a bunch of external rules onto someone, MI is completely designed to mobilize a person's inner tools and motivations. Think of it this way. Traditional advice giving relies heavily on external pressure. It's imposed from the outside, and let's be honest, it almost inevitably becomes argumentative. Motivational interviewing, on the flip side, relies entirely on internal motivation. It pulls that desire to change from within the person, and it fundamentally respects their autonomy. So instead of just saying, hey, you must do this, an MI practitioner structures the conversation so the person naturally concludes, I want to do this, and here's exactly how I'm going to do it. All right, let's hit Section 3, the evidence for MI, proving that it actually works. To see if this actually holds up in practice, we can look at a massive systematic review and meta-analysis. This was published in the British Journal of General Practice by researcher Suni Rubak and colleagues. They rigorously analyzed 72 randomized controlled trials that used motivational interviewing as the core intervention. And what they found was that MI clearly, consistently outperformed traditional advice giving across a really broad spectrum of behavioral problems. Get this, in an incredible 74% of the studies reviewed, motivational interviewing showed a significant, clinically relevant success rate. 74%. That is absolutely massive for behavioral interventions. And honestly, what's even more remarkable is that they found MI was effective even in super brief 15-minute clinical encounters. You really don't always need hours and hours of deep therapy. Sometimes just a short, highly structured conversation using these techniques can trigger massive life changes. And we're not just talking about feeling better mentally. The meta-analysis proved undeniable, real-world physiological impacts. We are talking about reduced BMI, lower total blood cholesterol, decreased systolic blood pressure, and even lower blood alcohol concentration. These are tangible, measurable physical health improvements, and they're generated simply by changing the way a practitioner speaks to a patient. Pretty wild, right? That brings us to Section 4, Core Principles of MI. Let's look at the foundational frameworks. To start, you really have to understand where the person is currently at on their journey. This relies on the trans-theoretical model's stages of change, because people don't just jump straight to step 4, action. That's just not how we work. They start at pre-contemplation, literally not even thinking about changing. Then they move to contemplation, where they're weighing the pros and cons. Then preparation, action, and finally maintenance. A super common trap we all fall into is treating someone who's in pre-contemplation as if they are totally ready for action. MI helps safely guide people linearly from one step to the very next. So, how does the practitioner actually facilitate this? Well, they adopt the PACE mindset. PACE stands for partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. It's this beautiful, interwoven process required to really embody the spirit of MI. Notice that evocation is key here. You're eliciting or evoking their motivations out of them rather than just installing your own. It strictly prioritizes collaboration over authority. You're a partner, not a boss. Then we have the OARS core skills. These basically dictate the flow of the actual conversation. You ask open-ended questions, you affirm the client's strengths, you practice reflective listening, and you summarize those reflections back to them. And here's a really interesting tidbit. Highly skilled MI providers actually offer far more reflections than they ask questions. They act almost like a mirror, helping the person hear their own thoughts and their own contradictions out loud. Now for the fun part. Section 5, the Practitioner's Toolkit. Time for some rapid-fire questioning. First up in our toolkit is the DARN CAT acronym. This trains you to actively listen for what we call change talk. You want to keep your ears open for their desire to change, their ability to do it, their reasons, their needs, their commitment, activation, and the actual steps they're taking. Your ultimate goal here is to catch those subtle little moments of change talk and encourage them, rather than getting bogged down arguing against their sustained talk. Sustained talk, those incredibly creative, elaborate excuses we all make to just keep doing our bad habits. Now let's look at some very specific questions. This first one is just brilliant. It's called the Readiness to Change Ruler. You simply ask, on a scale from 1 to 10, how important is it to you to make this change? But here is the absolute magic trick. If they answer with a low number, let's say a 3, instead of asking why they aren't a 10, you ask, why did you choose a 3 and not a 1? This forces them to immediately start arguing for their own motivation. They literally start listing out the reasons they actually do want to change. It's a total game changer. Next up, we have a technique called querying extremes. You ask them, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen if you don't change? And on the flip side, what are the absolute best things that might happen if you do? This strategy is fantastic for breaking through denial. It helps the person vividly visualize the absolute best and worst case scenarios in their own mind, making the stakes of their behavior feel intensely, undeniably real. And that logically leads right into the looking forward, looking back technique. You might ask something like, before this became a problem, how were things better? Or, if you don't change, what could your future be like? This is all about building a powerful perspective. It helps the person step out of the immediate, day-to-day gratification of their habit and really see how this behavior is fundamentally altering their entire life's timeline. Now, this next one is incredibly counterintuitive, which is exactly why it works so well. It's called decisional balance. You literally ask, what are some good things about this behavior? You allow the client to admit the whole truth, that they actually get some tangible, real benefits from the bad habit. It is amazing to see how once they feel totally heard and completely unjudged, you can then gently follow up with, okay, so on the flip side, what are the less good things? It just completely neutralizes their defensiveness. Okay, now for the most advanced tool in the kit. The therapeutic paradox. This isn't even a question, it's a bold, provocative statement. You look at a stubborn client who has made little to no progress and you just say, maybe now is just not the right time for you to make changes. It is incredibly risky, but it can be highly effective. Often, by giving them full permission to fail, they experience this sudden surge of reactance. They start arguing with you that they are ready, and suddenly they're the ones fighting for the change. Which brings us to the end of our explainer. We've explored the underlying psychology, the hard data, and the exact tools you need to unlock behavioral change in others. But, I do have to wonder, Learning these skills requires a lot of practice, empathy, and patience. So maybe now just isn't the right time for you to try learning motivational interviewing. Or is it? Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer. Get out there and start having better conversations.
What did you think? Leave a comment. Let me know if there was something you particularly like. As I said, I'll put a link to the book. It's definitely worth a read. As a set of skills, these are skills that I use every single day, multiple times a day. If there are topics that you want to cover, please let me know.